Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good morning. Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanning here with co-host Mario Ramos Reyes, and today we welcome our special guest, Theodore Rebard, a professor of philosophy from the University of St. Thomas in Houston. We begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Lord, by the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful. In the same Spirit, help us to relish what is right and always rejoice in your consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Professor
Jim,
Rebard.
before we go even a moment further,
all right.
That Veni Sancte Spiritus prayer is the way I open every class, only we do it in Latin.
Well, that Veni Sancte Spiritus, that sounded English to me. All right. Professor Rebard, let's start optimistically. Can you tell us, you've been teaching at St. Thomas for a good long time, and I'm sure you've had some teaching successes. Could you tell us about a couple of them, perhaps?
I was wondering about them, and do you mean individual stories without mentioning names? Is that the kind of thing you're looking for?
Or you could name names. I mean, I know. Either way, it depends on what kind of a lawyer you have on retainer.
Well, these are all going to be good things. And this past spring, two of my former students, alumnae of the university, entered Religious Orders of Women. Another alumna sent me an invitation to her wedding. This young woman went to an internship with ISI immediately after her graduation, but the striking thing was that her wedding invitation was entirely in Latin.
Whoa!
Every word.
But now, just a second. ISI is an acronym, so you have
International Studies Institute, I think.
Right, and I just got their publication, The Canon, or one of the publications.
I think they have a couple. I think perhaps Modern Age is one of theirs
get that
as
too.
well.
I don't know why they had that title.
I don't know.
It's a bait and switch, if you ask me. But go ahead.
An irony in there. Certainly, above all, I have, by the way, I have a habit of keeping track of a lot of former students. And I have countless lawyers, CPAs, a whole lot of MDs, not to mention a bunch of cops and firemen. But most importantly of all, the students whom I know who are alumni of our program and whom I taught when they were kids are good parents to their own children. And I see a lot of these kids at Mass on Sunday with their own kids, and it's enormously, enormously heartening. So some good happens. Some good happens.
That's very, very good. What
we have
makes it possible?
A couple of vocations to the priesthood as well. Pardon me?
What makes it possible, these successes? What are the converging considerations that lead to such successes?
If I put this in one two-word expression, it is advocacy teaching. That is to say that, and I tell them this in every course, I asked them, what do you suppose I put on my tax form where it asks for your occupation? And they say, well, you probably put professor. I said, right. What does that mean? That means I am supposed to profess. Now, what would anyone want to profess but the truth? And so I am in teaching, for example, which I do, metaphysics. I teach Thomistic metaphysics, and I advocate for the truth of those ideas. And I think it is because of that involvement and that advocacy that many of them see the point, rather than say were I merely to stand back and say, well, there is this philosopher in the 13th century who said these things. So I think advocacy teaching is the first point.
That's a critical component. Mario,
and almost no one does this. Pardon me?
I was going to ask Mario if he can do advocacy teaching where he is.
Let me be a little bit critical, just for the sake of the conversation. If you were in a public setting, public college, and you would be claiming that you are doing advocacy teaching, and the content of your teaching is professing what you already said, the truth, and they know that you are coming from a particular perspective, then they will say that you are indoctrinating students. Mm-hmm. What would you say about that in this context?
My response would be that they are probably, such an objector is probably confusing education as indoctrination with education as initiation, and then I would probably want to say something about Plato.
What would you say about Plato?
What would you say?
Socrates, who is, of course, represented by the escaped slave, is an everyman figure. And what happens with this escaped slave, of course, is that fighting his way through a very difficult journey out of the cave is initiated into the presence of the real and the really real. And that is the model for understanding education as initiation.
Now, Mario being where he is, and I know that you're aware of this individual because you spoke of him the other day, Ted. What's the story of John Sr.? Initiation, advocacy, indoctrination, teaching in a public setting. What went on there?
Well, by the way, this is an opportunity for me to plug Father Bethel's recent book, I think it was 2 years ago, John Sr. and the Restoration of Realism, which is a magnificent book, even if you haven't read John Sr. John Sr., of course, was a realist. He was concerned to stem the tide of a flight from the real, which has been going on for centuries now. I've just read Machiavelli with my honors students, and we see already in Machiavelli's Realpolitik a flight from speculative knowledge, a flight from truth, a flight, therefore, from being itself. But in any case, Senior had to do this, and Quinn and Neblick, his colleagues, had to do this in a very careful way. And I've only ever known one former student of John Senior who was affected positively through his entire life by Senior. I suspect that he had that particular genius of being able to let the works be his advocates. I don't have that genius. But I don't have that touch.
Let me
Some
interject.
people can do that.
Let me interject right there. If you claim, or one claim that there was a genius, a charisma in Senior and Queen teaching those classes, they were English professors. So
right.
It seems that there is no method that we can apply. We need to wait until another Senior, another Queen, so that we can have this generation, this cadre of people who are being awakened by this gifted teacher. So everything seems to me then that it resides on the teacher. So there is no way that I can, where I'm teaching or anyone who's teaching in a public setting would convey the same awareness of reality as these people did. So if that is the case, then we are trapped in in a cul-de-sac because we are waiting for extraordinary individuals. What would you say about that?
I would say two things. First, that I agree that there is no technique by which the great tradition, the perennial philosophy, in all of its manifestations, literary as well as philosophical and theological and aesthetic, the music in the great sense, can be taught. I don't believe that there is a technique for that. At the same time, and people ask from time to time, do you have a teaching philosophy? And my answer is, after 42 years of teaching, no. I coax, I cajole, I explain. Sometimes I yell. I offer lots of examples of metaphors, and we read poetry. I look the kids in the eyes, and I try to treat them as adults. But I do not have what I do. You see an echo of Michael Polanyi in this, is irreducible to a formulaic technique. However, many teachers can accomplish the same thing, but it is a matter of analogous instances depending on who that teacher is. And this really is not so much a matter of waiting for another genius, waiting for another Frank O'Malley, waiting for another Mark Van Doren, waiting for another John Senior in order for university teaching to succeed. That would be my response.
Well, now let me back up a little bit here. Socrates, we've mentioned three times. John Senior, we've been talking about him. But Socrates came to an unhappy ending, and John Senior lost his job. What would you say about these phenomena?
That's right. And Dennis Quinn was not able to continue the same seminars, so he had to quit. Certainly, what he was doing if he had to conserve his job at KU.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the governing principle, and I want to come back to see this in Socrates, but the governing principle, it seems to me, is fiat justitia ruat caelum. Let justice be done, let the right thing be done, even if the sky falls in. And I think we see this in Socrates. And Socrates professes in the Apology that no harm can come to a good man. And it is, as it were, presciently Christian that he says that. There are interpretations that, of course, that say, well, look what happened to him, so he was wrong when he said that. But I don't think so. Yes, there are risks. But I turn so frequently to Romans 8:28. All things have been, I have it memorized, good things have been put into our lives. Now, that doesn't mean that they all look good, but They are good things. I'm wondering here, I'm sorry. But to return to the point, there is no world so evil a good man can't live in it, I suppose, and there is no university so bad that a good teacher cannot teach in it.
There are universities, are there not, Ted, which don't? I couldn't believe this. Tongue-in-cheek, he says. There are universities that don't have metaphysics as part of the core curriculum.
Yes, and I think ones where you don't even have to take any philosophy courses because some other humanities course satisfies.
Now, how is it at the University of St. Thomas in Houston? My daughter graduated from that very institution. How is it that metaphysics is in the core curriculum, and is it an endangered species?
Well, it's in our core curriculum. Golly, I don't know when that core curriculum was written, but when I came to the University of St. Thomas in 1990, it was one of 4 courses in our core curriculum. So we had philosophical anthropology, ethics, metaphysics, and then we allowed the student an individual choice of a 4,000 level, junior or senior level course. And then I guess it must have been about 15 years ago when violence was done to the core curriculum and it was cut back. We were cut back to only 3 courses. But metaphysics survived. Now, as to the second part, yes, it is an endangered species. Like Yogi Berra, I try not to make predictions, especially about the future, but I am not confident.
Wise man.
I am not confident that
just a second. Was Yogi Berra pre-Socratic?
In the view of my students, he may as well have been. None of them know who he is.
Well, we'll get to the vexing ahistoricity of the students shortly, but continue.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Going back to what we were saying about the context in which a teacher teaches.
Mm-hmm.
So I gather about your observation then, if you are Socrates and we are going to profess and move forward and raise questions and seek for the truth, and our context is such that doesn't share, let's put it this way, our view, our tenure will be very short, and as Socrates, we are destined to be martyrs. And John Senior is a witness of that. So, yes. And then there are other contexts where you can flourish. And so, because the context helped you in many ways, because let's say the context is Catholic, okay. Then I would conclude, I don't know if it's a very reasonable conclusion, that what counts in teaching is not only what the teacher does, is not as much as what is the technique, as you said. It's a question also.
I'm sorry, I missed that. It's not what counts is not so much, or not only what the teacher does.
It's not right. It's not so much. It's not so much what the teacher does, or what technique he may be using, even though that contribute to the good teaching. Rather, the context is being protected by power. The power of that particular administration of that college or university. So if you don't have someone taking care of that dimension, then you run into a Socrates field, and then the result, the outcome, ultimately is uncertain. Now, you may say, well, always there will be some good fruits because no one can hurt kill a good person, as Socrates said. Well, but again, then we need to add an element of teaching, which is power. in a general sense, I'm not talking about the power of the state,
an element
but
of
the
teaching
power of
which is.
I mean, you can do what you do because somehow you have help or you receive help from the administration of your own college. But if you you teach the same thing in a college where the power is not on your side, you may be rather finishing as John Senior's end.
Right. Yes,
So
exactly.
in other words, there is an ingredient there which is perhaps is not limited to the teaching itself. It's something that contributes to that teaching is the power that is given to you, the protection so that you can teach whatever is in you need to teach. Even when you say, well, I begin my classes with a prayer. Well, imagine you are in a public setting and begin with a prayer. Are you with, I mean, that's my observation about what you said. What do you say about that?
I've never taught in a public school of any kind. I suspect that it would be a job that I probably could not do.
Okay.
On the other hand, there are people who succeed eminently in doing that. It can be done. And John Senior and Nublick and Quinn were examples of it, at least for a while.
Right.
But I don't think that is a job that I could do.
Right. So, which lead us to a broader discussion about to what extent really can we announce the truth in a world which is completely fragmented, completely relative. The culture is completely without sense of reality. And so how then we go about in front of a room full of freshmen where there's no sense of reality, and on the top, the power that somehow organized that doesn't have sense of reality either. That's the reality that we have faced every day.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I concur wholeheartedly with great dismay. One approach, it's more available to literature departments, is what Peter Crayf refers to as backdoor approaches. He cites, I think appropriately, Walker Percy and Flannery O'Connor, who are certainly indirect in their communication of this great tradition, but rather effective as well.
One thing that we might add to the discussion at this point is a distinction between power and authority.
Yes.
Power is a raw, undifferentiated term, whereas authority, genuine authority, has a right to be obeyed. And if
the distinction lies in the association with truth.
And if we're ever to practice the virtue of obedience, which is a central virtue, we have to be obedient to authority, and I would say wary of power, sort of like the weather in Houston. You want to be wary of it. And so one of the things that is of use, I think, is in a context in which power rules, one can challenge that power and show why it really falls short of being an authority. So in a secular context in which power rules, one opening for the teacher is to make it very clear to students that they are subservient to power rather than obedient to an authority, and search for ways with them to challenge that power. And this is an extrapolation, and I won't talk about this until later in the show. That's the reason why we have something like the American Solidarity Party, to challenge the powers that be and challenge them from a perspective of solidarity, and we do so at the level of education as well as every other cultural venue that we have. But how about now? Mario's raised some tough questions, and I think you very well acknowledge the difficulties.
The difficulty is enormous. And you alluded to this just a moment ago, and so did Mario, Jim, that are in a tsunami of artificiality, of flight from reality, of a mentality of power, efficiency, money, haste, superficiality, expediency. They have no common experiences. They're isolated. They're in a terrible situation culturally, if I use the term in an exceedingly broad sense.
Yes.
And it's very hard to know how do you address them.
Can you?
The odds, humanly speaking, the odds are against us.
Okay. Can you give us some particular cases in which the kind of rootlessness of students surfaces in your teaching, and you see that they're uprooted in many different ways? I'm thinking of obstacles that we've all faced in teaching. Can you give us some particular examples, or if not off the top of your head, maybe some trends that you've picked up on?
Okay, an example of exactly what again?
Well, a rootlessness on the part of students. You mentioned Walker Percy, how they're lost in the cosmos.
Well, over the years, I have an awful lot of kids who come in my office with an academic question, but really what they want is an ear. So I hear a lot of this, and I hear a lot of lost kids. But among that, that large number, I also hear a lot of kids who are very glad to hear the profession of things that make sense. Just in the last year, I've had two students, one last summer and one a year, I guess about a year and a half ago or so. The poor young man grew up with parents who were divorced, fathers remarried once, maybe twice again. The mother is got psychological problems and drugs as well, and a horrible situation. And I don't know how many hours we spent talking, but the good out of it, and I'm not saying I was the cause, but the good out of this is that he returned to the sacraments. And I had another similar student, just as a matter of fact, who is not a Catholic, but right now taking instructions. And this is just stuff that I actually see. But, I think about this. I've been happily returning to Longfellow recently. And there is a very, very famous short poem of Longfellow's. It's The Arrow and the Song. You probably read it in high school. I breathed the song into the air. It fell to earth. I knew not where. For who has sight so keen and strong that can follow the flight of a song? And that, I think, is our teaching. We do our best. We know that we are only instrumental causes. We are in their very ontological nature made for intimacy with God. And, we try to help along a little bit. But do we see results? Well, sometimes and often, mostly not.
But
there are kids who are rescued from the shoreless sea, as C.S. Lewis has that metaphor.
Could you give us that poem again?
Sure. This is the second stanza of a song called, of a poem called "The Arrow and the Song." I breathed a song into the air. It fell to earth, I knew not where. For who has sight so keen and strong that it can follow the flight of a song?
That's beautiful.
Yeah, Longfellow is terribly overlooked. My friends in the English department tell me that that's unfair, but that the elite types regard him as too pedestrian.
Well, I'm pretty pedestrian myself.
Yeah, well, I think maybe that's why that's one of the reasons I like Longfellow. And I also think that poems should sometimes at least rhyme and be scannable, but that's another story. But yes, and I think this is involved also in Mario's observations about the general culture from which our students come, the secular universities in which nationwide, I guess most of them are enrolled. It's a chaos. But we can try to help rescue some of them from that chaos, and sometimes we succeed. And there are cases where we succeed and don't even know it. It's probably better for us.
Now, Mario, you've been asking some hard questions. When somebody gets an email from you, down towards the bottom of that email, you've got every email you send, you have a message from C.S. Lewis, and it must apply to you. I wonder if you could give us that message, and then if you and Theodore, our friend, could go forward with it.
I have 3 of them on different computers. I don't know how that works. One of them.
But here, what I wanted to do is get Mario to give us his.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yes, this is a quote that I got from C.S. Lewis. He says, "The task of a modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts."
Yes, that's from the first chapter, I think, of Abolition of Man.
Abolition of Man, yes.
Yes, I love that. And well, go ahead. You tell me.
No, my question, about this quote has a lot to do with my question that I raised about your experience. I wonder if this quote that C.S. Lewis wrote here is about a context in which we live in today, in the secular world, so to speak, a world of realities which are fragmented, and everything is fluid, and so we don't have any firm foundation, even our notion about what is reason, what is a human being. Everything seems to me is completely, in disarray. So how then, the question is, how then you begin teach freshman class when everything seems to be upside down?
Mm-hmm.
Even the reality of deserts is not there, because people don't. I think you said in very short page that you wrote, even students don't have a sense of reality because they were raised within the social media, and reality was virtual reality for them. They haven't had the experience of hiking or go swimming or sharing things like people in previous generation did.
I'd like to highlight your last point. Indeed, I agree with every word you said, and I see it all the time in the classroom. the thing that has struck me as a trend, mostly I'm kind of thinking in the last 2 years, is that if I have a classroom of 30 students, they have no common experiences. Not a book they read in high school, not an activity that they have done, not an interest that they have. And when I started teaching 40 years ago and 30 years ago and even 20 years ago, I could find those things. How many of you are interested in baseball? How many of you in high school read 1984 or some of the what used to be the high school books? How many of you have read Pride and Prejudice or irrigate Jane Austen? And none. Last week I asked in classes, has anyone read Lord of the Rings? I got 1 out of 90 students. So they come to us with nothing. I have a friend who's retired from teaching history at the University of Texas at Austin who says that they know almost nothing of anything that has happened within their own lifetimes and absolutely nothing of anything that happened before. Furthermore, another thing that you mentioned is they don't have any experience of reality. They grew up in cities and suburbs. They swam in chlorinated pools. Everything was controlled. And they've never, these are my 4 favorite examples, swum in the ocean, ridden horseback, hiked and camped in the wilderness, or gazed at the stars. They don't have that elemental experiential knowledge which one brings to the education of imagination, emotion, and memory. And the failure of education of emotion is pertinent to your citation from Lewis. They are in emotional deserts, and so even the very idea of ordinate passion is alien to them. And there are, I think, what comedians call a tough audience.
Well, when students are that way, how can you get through your classes and wrap up your courses and still have hair on your head?
Well, see, again, there is no technique. But I don't know if this is contributory or not, but I have very short, almost military hair. I wear a suit and tie every day. I pray before class, and I think what they get is, oh, this is old school. And but it's something a little bit different for them. And many of them actually do begin to listen. There's another component to this. There's a line attributed to variously to Napoleon and to Theodore Roosevelt. Courage is not the strength to go on; it is going on when the strength has left. But there's a Christian footnote to that, which is that what that means is that when human strength has left, then how Pauline, then I have God's strength. And one just soldiers on and does his best.
Very good. Let me, I've already made one allusion to the American Solidarity Party. Let me, especially in light of the context in which teachers do what they do and find fruitful ways of doing it. In the American Solidarity Party, there are actually quite a few teachers. I think there are probably more signs of the times, probably more software engineers than there are teachers. And the software engineers tend to be wonkish, and the teachers tend to be preachers sometimes to the software.
Yes, yeah, we do.
Yeah, at any rate, we had a couple weeks now a new platform, and looking forward to the open door sessions that we have every week. Our plan really is to work our way through that platform and invite people to speak who were instrumental in that particular part of the platform. Now, being cowardly, I didn't sign up for any platform discussions. The platform discussions go on and on and on and on, worse than any faculty meeting. Unless, of course, the faculty meeting is about curriculum,
almost
in
nothing
which
could
case
be worse than that.
It never ends. Well, Mario selected a short passage from the new platform, which passed. We had elected delegates, but it did not pass easily. It was, I think, a 14-10 pass. And I'm sure of all 24 of the people that were in this platform reconstruction, I'm sure that none of them are completely happy with all of it. That's to be expected. But now here's something that I'd like to read kind of slowly and see what you make of it. Education is vital to the formation of the human person and the good of society. And so, the American Solidarity Party advocates, let me get my words straight, advocates. Gee, did I hear something about education for advocacy early on? I think I did.
Yes, you did.
The American Solidarity Party advocates for, affordable, diverse, and well-rounded educational options. And the wish list continues, public support of both public and private schools with a preferential option. Are there very many Catholics in this party? Oh, yeah, there are a lot. With a preferential option for economically disadvantaged students. And now this tells you that there are a lot of teachers in the party. And an emphasis on making teaching a well-paying occupation. All right. Jump in there, Ted, Professor Rebard, at any point. And what's your reaction? You're not a member of the party. You are not now, nor have you ever been a card-carrying member of the American Solidarity Party. And you've diplomatically refrained from commenting on any one of my innumerable posts with respect to the party. But now we've got you. So what do you think of that particular passage?
I like everything in the passage, but I have a big question mark. You have the word diverse. And if you maybe read Anthony Esselin's last book but one, I think, Out of the Ashes, you may remember that in that book he has a rant on Cant, which C-A-N-T, buzzwords. And he lists out a number of very good examples, such as inclusivity, and I've forgotten the rest. I add to this list, I add mercy, which now means nothing, and others. But in his list, he includes diversity. And I think that's a good judgment on his part. What do you mean when you say that education is to be diverse? It sounds dangerous to me. It's a buzzword these days.
Yes, it is a buzzword. I grant you that. Now, people who listen to this podcast know that on many occasions I've said very positive things about Thomas Aquinas College.
Yes.
Here, one county up, Ventura County. I think it's an extraordinary place.
It is. Well, I think the world of it.
True liberal arts in the best sense of the word. And when you look at their graduating class, you look long and hard, and maybe you'll see one or two African Americans. That's it. One or two. Now, I spoke with the president of Thomas Aquinas College about that, and he said, as far as he can tell, the difficulty is that smart young African American kids, very much directed by their parents, don't see much future in the liberal arts, haven't had a lot of exposure to the liberal arts, but are real interested in becoming engineers, say, or real interested in becoming computer people, or real interested in getting into the financial sector. And they think that they've got to do that, because if they don't do that, they're not going to really bring up the African American community with them. And this is a very difficult problem. Now, that there are exceptions, but I actually think...
Maybe it would help if they read Thomas Sowell.
Well, it might, but I think Thomas Sowell has a view of capitalism that conflicts with the American Solidarity Party's view of distributism. And the idea of distributism, hearkening back to Leo XIII and Rerum Novarum and Chesterton and Belloc, is to, well, I could use the word in a different way, diversify the holding of private property rather than consolidate it in corporations. That kind of
incidentally, while we're talking about names and books, I think a few years back, and it's been quite a few years now, Joseph Pierce did a great job on that with a little book called Small is Still Beautiful.
Small is Still Beautiful.
And
Joseph Pierce is a member of the American Solidarity Party.
May I raise a question? I just was listening very carefully. It seems to me that the issue that we are debating at this point is, what is the role of politics in education? And I still want to use the word power, but not in negative sense, because ultimately the highest form of charity is politics, and politics is being exercised through power, and power serve the common good. So we begin with the common good. I understand that, but ultimately, it seems to me that if we're going to have a diverse group of students, perhaps it's not enough to trust in the self-education of people who look for competition and get into these colleges, rather than something in society which we may say, well, the government would try to set up certain policy to include people who otherwise wouldn't be included. So that the question is, what is the role of politics in education? The same thing that what I said before, that method would be good if I have somehow an authority, if you will, that is protecting what I'm doing, but the authority is not such. I on my own there. And so I need to find a way to teach the same message, so to speak, backdoor. I understand that. And so, and that, I think, is the question. What is the role of politics, if anything? Or we say, no, politics have no role here. We let people decide by themselves, let the market work, and then people who are in private school will have the advantages over people who are in the public schools.
I don't have any answer or any good pertinent comment.
Well, that's the damnedest thing I ever heard.
Very, very, very broadly,
and I want to say the same thing.
Somehow the American public has been conned into believing some lies about higher education, and higher education has become fraudulent to some extent as well. So there's a lot of red pilling that needs to be done.
Let me offer an analogy here. And the analogy's all limp, but let me offer an analogy. It is now the case in Canada, our neighbor to the north, that Catholic hospitals are coming to participate in government-funded, government-supported euthanasia programs. Now, I'm going to offer a conjectural analysis of how this comes to happen. Catholic hospitals and Catholic education, and there's a connector, in Canada, both have support from the government.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have support from the government, oftentimes, over a period of time, you need that support more and more to keep your institution going.
Mm-hmm.
So more and more Canadian Catholic institutions and education are wrestling with the freedom to convey the basic tenets of Catholicism to Catholic students.
Right.
Now, what happens in medicine? For many years, my wife worked for a hospital, Catholic hospital, and the vocations are no longer there. And various medical groups, secular medical groups, local, tried to keep the hospital going. And the last time I drove by the hospital, it's across the street from our parish, you could see the first of many new houses in a restricted housing development going up where the hospital used to be, because the hospital no longer is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have Catholic hospitals in Canada, I would say, quite frankly, caving in, knuckling under.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine the many meetings that they have, and the meetings will have somebody saying, oh, this is terrible, but, oh, this is a real shame, but we have to keep the larger hospital mission going, and the way we keep the larger hospital mission going is to, we'll say that somebody else is doing this on our hospital grounds, but we're not doing it. Somebody else is doing it. Now, I think that Catholics in education, Catholics in medicine, have to understand that they need to speak up publicly and pay up personally. And, that's hard to do. It's easy to talk about, but it's hard to do. And yes. I think that we must do that. And lots of times what we'll have to do is let the institutions that have become compromised, let them go their way and build our own institutions.
I agree wholeheartedly, and you know as well as I do that the number of real Catholic colleges in America can be counted on your fingers.
I have 10 fingers. I'm looking for somebody with 11. Do I hear 11?
No, I think they can be counted on one's fingers. And I'm not going to do that. But Thomas Aquinas and Christendom would be examples. Is it Northeast Catholic or Thomas More, where Anthony Ethelyn is these days?
Wyoming Catholic, where the students ride horses together.
I think that's wonderful. I think the world of that, and of course, the great Peter Kwasniewski was on their faculty. But in any event, they are doing the real thing. Thomas Aquinas College, I know, and the only other school that I know that fits this description is Hillsdale. They take government money. They don't let the salesman get his foot in the door. And I think that's what one has to do.
All right. Mario, is that pie in the sky? Is that Orthodox Catholic saber rattling? What do you say?
My concern about this approach is we are somehow getting into almost a private sphere, because if I say, well, then I'm not going to ask the government for any funds, so everything will come from private hands. So I'm reducing the students who are going to enroll, and perhaps unintentionally I will only accept those who are able to pay the tuition. So my group of students is not going to be as diverse as they should be. In other words, I'm capitulating that way the role of politics. And so, and I think that's a broader question. What is the role of politics in achieving the common good? Do we need to continue this procedural democracy, which ultimately claim to be neutral, but it isn't, because it's not allowing me to teach as my own views in a particular public university or college. So, and I think we are getting somehow moving into a very limited space. And so my sense, reading again the platform of this paragraph, American Solidarity Party, is perhaps, well, it's good for society, for the human person, that we need the public support for education. Now, that observation or that paragraph may lead us into political commitment, which means we need to somehow get elected in order to use power wisely, as many other people who are people who don't share our view are doing. And so that's my reaction.
All right.
In other words,
so if the Benedict option means hiding in a rabbit hole, forget it. We're not going to hide in a rabbit hole. We're going to maintain our integrity, and we're going to speak up loudly and proudly, and our party isn't going to win this election or the next election, but it's going to establish itself as a responsible Christian democratic voice in the public square. All right, that's what I'm for. And you know, later on, I don't know, Mario's probably spotted this, but I wouldn't expect Professor Rebard to have spotted it. Later on in the platform, under civic participation, we have a line that says, vote early and vote often.
the old Chicago maxim.
It was some representative from Chicago that insisted that we in the party follow that. Well, we've come to the end of our hour, and we want to thank Professor Ted Rebard from the University of St. Thomas in Houston, and we appreciate his perspectives, and we appreciate his being an interested listener to the ideas that the American Solidarity Party is putting forward. And we look forward to having him join us again.
Thank you very much, both of you. Your generosity astonishes me. Certainly nothing I deserve, but it's been a delight.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
We're going to end. We usually end with the gospel for the day, but the epistle written by one of the apostles to one of the bishops, letter from St. Paul to Timothy, is a very striking letter, and I'm going to read that, and it is the epistle in today's liturgy. Beloved, teach and urge these things. Whoever teaches something different and does not agree with the sound words of our Lord Jesus Christ and the religious teaching is conceited, understanding nothing, and has a morbid disposition for arguments and verbal disputes. From these come envy, rivalry, insults, evil suspicions, and mutual friction among people with corrupted minds who are deprived of the truth, supposing religion to be a means of gain. Indeed, religion with contentment is a great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, just as we shall not be able to take anything out of it. If we have food and clothing, we shall be content with that. Those who want to be rich are falling into temptation and into a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all evils, and some people in their desire for it have strayed from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pains. But you, man of God, avoid all of this. Instead, pursue righteousness, devotion, faith, love, patience, and gentleness. Compete well for the faith. Lay hold of eternal life, to which you were called when you made the noble confession in the presence of many witnesses. The word of the Lord. Come, Lord Jesus, come.
Amen.
We'll be back, and this podcast will be posted within a day or two.
Thank you.
Okay, we're all set, and I bet you Mario's going to run off to class. And
thank you very much.
I know that Ted has some bailing to do on the mean streets of Houston. All right. Take care, everyone.
Very good.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all very much. Bye now.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.